Hello, Brother Monroe here, and welcome to another video in how to kind of campaign and how to approach the campaign. And this is specifically to do with how to design battleships for the campaign. Battleships are your largest, most powerful, and arguably most important class of ship because they give you your power projection, which prevents you from being blockaded and allows you to blockade other people. Now, when you're designing any ship class, you really need to take into account what the ship is for. But for battleships, that's relatively simple. They are there for smashing up enemy battleships and taking hits and generally going around and sinking your enemy, no matter what they may be. And because of that, and because they are an investment, you really want to make sure that they are well protected as well. So really, this is just for those players who are new to the game and wondering, how do I go about designing a battleship? How do I tell if it's any good or not? I'm going for the 1930 custom battle because the how to campaign video was, I said, started in 1930 if you're a beginner. So that's why I'm doing 1930. In case you're wondering, if you're an experienced player, you probably know all of this already, but you know, you might pick something up, you might disagree, you might have extra tips. Let me know down in the comments. So whilst I do love this ship, I'm actually going to build it on the modern Battleship 1 because it's a fairly generic hull for Spain. And it is a flat-decked hull, which anything without a break in it, these are much easier to build on than other types of ship. So, first of all, you need to learn restraint with battleships. They can become very, very expensive very quickly simply because they're just bulky. Big, bulky, massive battleships end up having the same armor and protection as a smaller one that costs less and you can get more of them. So don't go full ham. Don't just go, oh yeah, I'm going to go for the absolute biggest battleship I can make, because the cost is going to absolutely balloon. So do be careful with that. Now, there is some personal preference. Some people like fast battleships. Some people like slow ones. Some people like really heavy armor schemes. Some people don't. I'm just going to go for a kind of middle of the road kind of ship. So one thing you kind of want to sort out when you're going in is how much am I wanting to do? Is this a full-on battleship? Am I going to go medium? Am I going to go small? We're going to go medium just to show you a kind of nice balanced ship. So one thing you can do is if you hover over the modern Battleship 1 here, it says that our maximum optimal speed is 32 knots. Now, 32 knots is basic. If we go over 32 knots, we'll be paying over the odds. So that effectively sets our maximum speed. 32 knots is more than enough. We'll probably be fine with 30. 30 is still perfectly acceptable, but we could push it up to 32 later if we wanted to. Now, we're with standard beam and draft, we're at 69,000 tons. That is very, very large and very, very chunky. So one of the things I would do straight away is kind of pare this back a bit. Possibly all the way down to 45,000 tons. Because really, any battleships over 50,000 tons, you're really getting diminishing returns. And I do use them in my series, but that's because they're fun. Really, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get the protection and the firepower on as low a displacement for as low a cost as possible, because then you can get more ships, and more ships is better. So we're going to go for 45,000 tons to start with, and 30 knots. That's our base. The next thing is range, bulkheads, and crew quarters. I would leave all of these in the middle. When you're designing a campaign ship, you won't have this slider. I'm going to leave it at 0 cadets because that gives you the same statistics that you get in the campaign building mode. When you are selecting your towers, if you're going for a sensible build like this, do actually have a look at the stats, the costs, and the displacement especially. So in terms of the stats, both of these towers have the same base accuracy. But this one, the Modern Tower 4, is $1.5 million more expensive and 90 tons extra displacement. So this is not worth it. They have identical stats. If we compare these two, this one has slightly worse stats. It costs exactly the same, but it is slightly lighter, saving you about, what, 300 tons or something like that. So, you know, fair choice between these two, but I think this one here, the Modern Tower 2, is our best bet. So we're just going to plop that one down. For our rear tower, we have quite a lot of options. And again, I'm looking at base accuracy as the kind of go-to stat. And it just gets progressively better. So then we're looking at costs. So these ones are both 900,000. This one's 1 million. This is 1.1, 1.4, 1.6, and this is 2.8. So yes, it has better stats. In particular, it gets long-range accuracy, communications range, and things like that. Actually, it's not that big either. So it might be worth it, or it might just be a bit much. However, what it does do is save space. This is a very small tower. And when we're going for a build like this, where we're going for a fairly compact ship, a small tower, small footprint on your hull can have a quality all of its own. So we're going to go with this one. This should give us really nice stats for the size of ship. And we should be okay with this. Now, the next thing I would tend to go for is the gun setup. Now, immediately, this hull has a single built-in barbette. I would immediately go ABX triple. So one triple gun here, one here, one here. As a kind of default layout on this ship, because I've got a built-in barbette. I don't want to add extra weight by adding barbettes if I don't have to. So that kind of determines the layout for me. Now, looking at our main guns, the one thing you want to pay real attention to, first of all, is the default mark of the, well, the mark of the gun, which you can see right below where it tells you the type of gun it is. So our best Mark IV gun is a 13-inch. Now, for a battleship, that is too small. I'd say battleships like this, a modern battleship, you really want to be looking at the 14, the 15, or the 16-inch gun. And all of these are Mark III, so it does come down a little bit to personal preference. The 14s are a default 53 caliber, 15s are a 53, 16s. So they're all the same default length, so there's no difference there. Cost-wise, the 15s I think are a pretty good bet. The 14s are 3 million, 15s are 3.5, just over. And the 16s are 4.3. So there is a bit of a jump going from 15 to 16. There's also a bit of a weight jump as well. In terms of accuracy, so you can just look at the 1,000-meter accuracy to start off with. 65 for the 14s, 54 for the 15s, and 44 for the 16s. Now, that's at 1,000 meters, which obviously is not that useful. Really what you'd be interested in is either the 10 or the 15,000 meter accuracy. So if we actually put on a good crew, obviously we don't have rangefinders or anything else yet, but if we put on an actual crew, see the 15-inch gun's getting just under 3% at 10,000 meters. The 16's a bit lower at 2.7, and the 14's the same at 2.9. So at typical engagement ranges, I think in this case we're going to go for the 15-inch gun. I think that's a good compromise between these three options. We could go 16 for more power, but it will mean more weight, and it will mean probably want to armor it up a little bit more if we're floating around with 16-inch guns. We could go down to the 14-inch gun if we wanted to save some money and weight, but I think the 15-inch triple will work absolutely perfectly on this hull, and we're just going to put one at the front, one on that barbette, and one at the back. Then you really need to consider your secondary layout. So generally speaking, on most battleships, you probably don't need 6, 7, or 8-inch guns, unless you're going for a particular type of build. What you want is 4 and 5-inch guns, and then maybe some 2 or 3-inch guns. Because yeah, the only Mark V we have is the 2-inch. So yeah, we want either 4 or 5-inch guns. These are perfect for shooting destroyers. The 5-inch are a little bit better at that, I would say. And then you're just looking to see if you get any mounting points. And we don't for the 5-inch. But we do for the 4-inch. We've got a free mounting point up here. So we could stick in a couple of 4-inch guns, just like that. And we could maybe fit in a couple more down here. Now, if you see that these mounting points, these have got very restricted fields of fire. However, if you hold down Control, you can then freely place them, and you can see, you know, we can get a fair number of these guns in if we wanted to, for no real impact on our main guns. So always check your fire arcs, check that your secondaries aren't getting in the way. But how many did we get on? 6 4-inch triple guns should keep your battleship safe from the odd destroyer that happens to wander too close to it. And you know, we might be able to liberally scatter some 2-inch guns in as well. Wow, that tower can fit an unreasonable number of 2-inch guns. You might think, oh, 2-inch guns, what's the point of having those? Well, they can be surprisingly useful if a destroyer pushes in against you aggressively. You can kind of shoo them away with the 2-inch guns. And it will give them pause. They won't want to close in really, really close to you, which will give you a bit more torpedo avoidance. Once you've done that, you actually need to decide on the length of your guns. And this is how I'd recommend it. So I would skip past the propulsion and protection sections, and we're going to go down to armament. So for a battleship, generally speaking, you want increased AP shell, because you are mostly focused towards taking out other battleships. However, if you know that the enemy don't have very many capital ships, standard ratio also works pretty well. So we're going to go for increased AP. Our secondary guns are mostly going to be firing HE shells. We're going to come back to these two. Choosing your bursting charge, I tend to go with the TNT-4. It gives you a hull weight reduction. It gives you a nice pen boost, good damage boost. You can also go Pickrick, but I don't like the fact that it makes you go Splody, and the Dunite's even worse. So I tend to go for TNT, just the best version of TNT that you have access to. In terms of propellant, you basically, in 1930, you have the Cordite tree, so Cordite 2, Cordite 3, and triple base. Cordite 3 and triple base are actually okay, but if you have access to the triple base, eventually that will be your kind of end game propellant. Or you can go the tube powder route. The Cordite route gives you more damage. Your shells will be quite punchy, but it is a little bit riskier. So the Cordite 3 is actually pretty good, but the Cordite 2, you can see, you know, there's quite a high, there's a lot of red. Tube powder, on the other hand, means that your shells will do slightly less damage. However, your ship is significantly less likely to go and explode on you, and your penetration will be higher. It also gives you a bit of a gun reload time reduction. So there's kind of two approaches to it. I'd say Cordite 3 and triple base are actually pretty good. Tube powder 1, 2, and 3 are also good. It's just a slightly different way of building the ship. So I prefer the tube powder, so I'm going to go for tube powder 2. If you're going tube powder, they do benefit from increased shell size. What this does is it basically gives you more damage. So the tube powder pushes out the penetration. Going for super heavy also increases your penetration, so you're going for a max pen build. If you're going cordite, I tend to stick with the standard shells because I don't want to compound the exploding problems, and they already do plenty of damage anyway. So if I'm going cordite, I tend to stick with standard shells. If I'm going tube powder, I tend to go for either heavy or super heavy shells. Entirely up to you, of course, but those are the kind of two basic setups that I go with. Then in terms of our loading, generally you want the best loaders you can get, but you don't have to. There is something to be said for just sticking with enhanced loading, because it doesn't introduce ship flaws. But we're going to go for full auto loaders for now. And we're going to go for the best turret traverse system we have access to, which is the electro-hydraulic 2. I tend to prefer electro-hydraulics over the electricals, simply because the electricals have a slightly higher chance of causing fires and things. Then you want to make sure that you have a radar, if you have access to it, but you should in 1930 start. A hydrophone. You don't really need sonar on a battleship. They have terrible ASW anyway. You really should have escorts looking after them, but having the ability to detect some torpedoes at least is useful. And then you have your rangefinder. Basically, you have two choices. So just the highest you can get, which is 5. And then it's either stereoscopic or coincidence rangefinders. So it used to be for me, a very straightforward, just go for coincidence all the time. So what coincidence do is they give you better aiming speed and they give you better base gun accuracy. So these things are good at changing targets and things like that. They are also lighter. So these have an 8% main tower weight cost and secondary tower weight cost, and the stereoscopics are a 13. So stereoscopics are more expensive in terms of displacement and in terms of money by 10% or so. They also increase your main gun's weight by twice as much as the coincidence rangefinders. So they are heavier, they are more expensive. They don't give you as good gun aiming speed, but what they do give you is long-range gun accuracy and negatives on the shell splash interference from your own guns and from other guns. And this is new. So this is new in 109, and that makes the choice a little bit harder. Stereoscopic on this particular ship is pushing us to 140 million and 32,800 tons, or thereabouts. Coincidence rangefinder, we're at 32,500 tons and 138.5 million, or thereabouts. So there is a cost saving with coincidence rangefinders, and they give you, for me, I still prefer the gun aiming speed and the base accuracy buff compared to the shell splash reduction and the long range buff. Like, for me, they are it's how I prefer to run my ships, because I tend to end up brawling, and it makes the secondaries in particular more effective. But it very much a personal preference, I would say, at this point. You can either go for the stereoscopics if you want more long range firepower, coincidence if you want just all-round good, but cheaper. And now, finally, we can look at our gun length. So, I'm not going to change the diameter of the gun, the caliber, but I'm going to change the length. So these are currently 15-inch 46 caliber guns. They have a rate of fire of 1.23 rounds a minute, and that is a little low for me. It's okay. but it's a little low. So I probably wouldn't want to lengthen these guns, but just to show you what would happen if we did. If we made them max length, if we made them 54 caliber, our rate of fire goes down to 0.8 rounds per minute. And that is a little bit too low. I'd say 1.2 for main guns on a battleship is about right. And the other thing you can see is it's hard for me to show you with the mouse because if I move, the tooltip goes away. But if you look at the deck penetration for the AP shells, which by the way we haven't changed yet, but you see it even at 22,500 meters is very, very low. So that's not really what we want. So if we go back to the default length, I would actually shorten these by a little bit. I'll bring them down to a 45. Just to get that rate of fire up just a smidge. Not by much, just a little bit. Now we can select our shells. So with AP shells, I would generally go for the Cat Ballistic 2s. Not everyone agrees with me with this. But if you're going with a 15-inch mid-rate or 14-inch or a 16-inch gun, if you go for a Cat Ballistic 2 and then look at our penetration table for these 15-inch 45 guns, if we look at our belt pen, those numbers are a little bit wonky. And you might be thinking, oh wow, 93 inches of pen, that's amazing. However, what you have to take into account is armor quality. And if I very quickly slap on Grip 5 and Citadel 5 for 148% armor quality, I'm sure we can get it up faster than that. If we put all the protection on, you can go higher than this. You can go up to like 160%. I think that's with Turtleback. 152, and there's the Modern 1 and Modern 2 armor, which can increase it more. But let's just call it 150%. Okay? So what you have to realize is that these numbers here in the gun table are not taking armor quality into account. This is the penetration against 0 bonus armor quality, so just iron plate. That's it. If we want to compare it to our own armor, or the armor that we would likely find on an enemy ship, which is either going to be using Turtleback or all or nothing, most likely, let's call it an average of 150%. That means to go from the numbers in the pen table to the actual thickness of armor, you need to divide the values by 2.5. And similarly, if you want to go from armor thickness to the values in the penetration table, you need to times by 2.5. So let's look at that 1500 meter penetration. So we got 50.1 inches of pen divided by 2.5. Realistically, that's 20 inches of pen against a battleship target that is using the same technology that we are on average. Now, that figure, that 20 inch, that is your absolute maximum penetration. And that's something the game doesn't tell you about these penetration tables. That is the most armor you'll be able to go through. So, if someone rocks up with 21 inch, you're not going to be able to go through that at 15,000 meters. If they have less than that maximum 20 inch, that maximum 20 inch is kind of if you get a perfect side-on, perfectly perpendicular hit. And that means that realistically it's going to be lower than that. And you're going to lose. It's not going to be as good as that. And is that good enough? Well, 20 inches of armor is actually quite a lot. And you can see here the default armor that we've been given is only 12.7. Most ships won't have more than 16. So is 20 inches of belt pen enough at 15,000 meters? Yes, probably. That is a decent amount of pen. So I think our setup is okay for penetration in terms of belt. We could also look at deck hits or deck pen. And you can see that that is actually really, really good. at long range. But actually what you want to look at is your deck pen at shorter ranges, because those are the ones that really piss you off. Because you're close to 10,000 meters and you'll assume that you're going to get belt hits, but you won't. You will still be getting deck hits because of the way the game considers deck, which I think they need to adjust because deck hits weren't that common. Anyway, on deck we have a 26.4 inch base. So if we divide that by 2.5, we can go through maximum 10.5 inches of armor on the deck, which is about right. So, you know, if they're rocking an 8-inch deck, then we should be able to go through it even at 10,000 meters. So the penetration on these guns is looking really good for our AP shells. Next up, we have to... Actually, those muzzle velocities are really off. I need to chat to the devs about muzzle velocities. Those muzzle velocities seem quite low. Anyway, the pen table's looking okay, so that's fine. The next thing you need to look at is your HE shell type. So this is the lower column that currently says 0.4, 0.4, 0.3, 0.3. You want on your main battleship guns, if you are shooting a destroyer can have 1.5 inches of armor. Let's say it has the 150% average armor quality. That means you need to be able to go through 3.75 inches of armor. And remember, these are maximum values. So you're looking at about 4 inches of pen to guarantee blowing up a destroyer with your HE shell. So you want to look for the shell that can do that and what range it can do it at. So if we go with a base fuse, that will completely obliterate a destroyer out to 15,000 meters, which is pretty good. That's pretty good. A nose fused doesn't have enough. So even at 1,000 meters, that 3.9, often the game is going to switch to an AP shell against the destroyer. So I think for this ship, the base fuse is the way to go on the main guns. Now, you can also check your secondaries to see what they're capable of, but you're probably not going to find anything particularly shocking. Aside from the fact that those 4-inch shells apparently can go through 9 inches of armor, which is quite impressive. With your secondary guns, though, I would generally just make them as long as possible. This just makes them more accurate, and more hits is exactly what you want from these things. They're going to be spamming out HE shells for the most part, and you kind of want them to hit as much as possible. So we're going to go with enhanced length guns on our secondary. So that's our armament setup. We've got 9 15-inch guns. We've got 12 triple 4-inch guns and 12 triple 2-inch guns. So we've got a nice layered offensive capabilities that we can really put a lot of firepower downrange against most targets. So next we need to actually get the ship going at 30 knots, because at the moment it's not going anywhere. So you need to choose your fuel. I would generally always go for the best oil you have available. You can then choose your engine. We don't have access to diesels, but these are very interesting. We have access to turbo electric, which in the campaign I would recommend you avoid because it is horrendously expensive. Just stick with turbines, geared turbines, or double-geared steam turbines. Double-geared steam turbines generally are the best bang for your buck. We're not trying to break the bank with this ship, although you'll notice it's already rather expensive. In terms of boilers, I tend to prefer balanced. If you have it available, you don't have to go balanced, but it generally is a pretty nice way to go. In terms of auxiliary drives, really you don't need anything beyond an auxiliary diesel. The electric batteries or the diesel-electric auxiliary system, these are nice to have, but this is kind of an extra thing if you have displacement and money to spare. Generally speaking, for a battleship, you want them to be as maneuverable as possible, so it's usually worth investing in the advanced prop shaft and the best steering gear you can get access to. They're not super expensive. They do add flaws to your ship, but generally that's worth it. And then you have the rudder choice, and again, this is very much a personal preference. Leave it on semi-balanced if you don't have a preference. If you want your ship to be able to like shift over, or rather, once the rudder is shifted, for it to turn quickly, then you want an unbalanced. I know that doesn't make sense. Balanced rudders are different in that the rudder will shift quickly, but the ship won't actually move as quickly. I prefer them for a very simple reason. They give you a 0.8% engine weight reduction, which doesn't sound like much, but is a nice thing to have, and it actually reduces your costs, and they tend to work okay. These tend to work absolutely fine. I tend to prefer a balanced rudder, but personal preference. Armor, generally always go... Oh, sorry, shouldn't be going on to armor yet. My mistake. Yeah, so there's something missing. A funnel. Okay. Smoke interference is still a thing, and you can find the statistic here. It is, however, far less of a big deal than it used to be. So, generally speaking, just take the biggest funnel you can, plonk it on the ship, you're good to go. And you can see here we don't even have any smoke interference. If your engine efficiency is over 100%, you're good. If you want a really long-range ship, consider boosting this by putting on extra funnels. If it's below 100%, add funnels till it's over 100% at the speed that you want. That's genuinely the easiest way to build ships these days. Could we actually push it to 32, which is the optimal speed? Yes, we could. Okay, so we have the option of pushing the speed up to the full 32 knots if we want to. Right, protection. So there's two components to this. There's the selections here. I would generally always go with the best armor you have access to. I would nearly always go with the best anti-flash you have access to. If you're playing the campaign, I would nearly always go with the best torpedo protection you have access to, especially on battleships, because the AI will run 1,000,000 torpedoes and invest in the anti-torpedo defense. It also helps you if you get hit by a mine. Always have at least a double bottom. Triple bottoms are nice to have, but they are expensive in terms of displacement and things. I would always go for reinforced bulkheads and watertight doors, assuming you have access to it. Super important. I would always go for the best anti-flooding system that you have access to as well. So generally speaking, you're just wanting to invest in these. In terms of the protection, you have the Citadel 3, the 4, and the 5. Citadel 3 is a little bit outdated, but is actually a completely viable choice. This is the distributed armor scheme where you have a well-protected Citadel, but the other parts of the ship are also well-protected. You have Turtleback. Turtleback is very nice. Some players absolutely swear by it. This gives you really high resistance. So if you take a hit, it reduces the damage that you are taking. It gives you better armor strength, which means that you are, your effective thickness is going to be better. However, it's not as good at protecting the important bits of your ship. It also takes less damage from mines with these, with the Turtleback. I prefer all or nothing. You get almost as good armor strength increase. You don't get the resistance craziness, but what you do get is a much reduced chance of your engines getting taken out, your ammo blowing up, or your flash fire, or a flash fire happening in your magazine. And those are things that can absolutely lose your battle. Like if you lose an engine and you can't run away from a bunch of destroyers and you get torpedoed, you're done. If you get an ammo debt, you're probably finished. If you get a flash fire, you're almost certainly finished. Or at least you're not winning the battle. You might keep the ship, but it's not good. So I tend to go for all or nothing. Some people prefer turtleback. Turtleback is also heavy. That's a bit of a problem with it. It increases your armor weight, whereas the like everywhere. But this tends to be much heavier for the same scheme than an all or nothing. So I tend to prefer all or nothing. And then, of course, we need to actually put armor on the ship. Now, there are two ways of armoring ship. There is the way that I talk about in the beginner's guide. I'm not going to go over that again, where you basically go, oh, I've got a 15-inch gun, so I'm going to have a 15-inch belt. And you kind of go from there. I want to show you a slightly more advanced way of doing armoring. And that is to look at our guns and to armor up against our own guns. And we have to choose a range that we want to be armored against our own guns. And for this particular ship, I think if we want our belt to be able to stand up to anything out to, let's say, let's go for the 1500 meters. That's a fairly typical range. So that 50.1 inch divided by our armor quality, which is 1.48, so 2.48. We would need 20 inches of armor to protect against our own guns, because these are very powerful guns. And you can see right away we're getting very close to our displacement. But this is to show you a kind of pure all or nothing design and how actual battleship design works. If you just want the simple one, yeah, I would go 15-inch main belt and a 7.5-inch main deck. But in terms of our deck pen, again at 15,000 meters, 40.8 divides 2.48. We would need a 16-inch main deck, which is far too thick. So really, we're not gonna be able to do that. But we can use the rule of halves. So the 20-inch main belt, if we half that and go for a 10-inch main deck, that will work fine. We definitely want our turrets armored up. So I take my main belt number and just add 2. And that's the maximum armor the turrets will take. Okay, so let's go for 11-inch on the top. Okay. So here I just have the best armor I can possibly fit on my turret. And we've gone overweight, but we have a fairly well protected citadel. And what we're focusing on this time is just making sure that our citadel does not take hits. So we can also fiddle with our layering. There's a few ways to do layering, but generally speaking, if you take your main belt and half it, and then half it again, and then half it again, that is a very solid way of layering up, and we can do the same on the deck, and for 1.5. Now we're 4% overweight, and that is because we're armoring up bits of the ship that we don't really care about. So if you look at the diagram here, it shows us this red section here. This is the section that's actually our main citadel. This has the thick armor, the stern, and the prow. They don't need they don't need all this protection. So we could drop it down, but we want some. Let's just go for 1.5 inch. Should keep out light HE shells. 1.5 on the superstructure, and probably on the 4.5 belts as well. And you'll find that we are underweight. Like, we are actually going in with 20 inches of main belt on this thing. And that is the advantage of all or nothing schemes. And if you go for this slightly different way of armoring ships, which is a little bit more historical, where you kind of look at what your guns can do and you kind of want to protect against your own guns. The last thing to armor up is the tower, and I generally have that match the turret face. So we're a little bit overweight, which is quite typical when you are designing a ship, and we are overweight. We have an aft weight offset. So this begins the stage of ship design I would call noodling. And this can take a very long time. We have the basics of our ship. This is a good ship. We just need to get it underweight, and we need to get our weight offset down below 7. Anything below 5 is okay, but 7's a little bit high. So we have an aft weight offset. But we don't want to just push this turret out, because you'll see it makes our weight problems a lot worse. Just pushing it that one notch added 400 tons. So that's bad. So what we want to do is we actually want to just... of course it won't move with me. So here you'll probably have to take off... Oh no, don't take off the tower. Oh, I hate you, game. Okay, if that happens, just cry. So what you're trying to do is move the turrets around. I have a whole video on how to balance ships, but now we have a very slight forward offset, which is not what I was after. So I've moved it too much, and now I have to move everything back a little bit, which is, again, not really what you want to be doing, because not all the bits will move, but I think we can get away with it. Now we have an aft weight offset again, so I'm going to bring this turret back as far as it'll let me without interfering with those guns. And we're down to a 0.1 offset. So we fixed our offset, but we are 123 tons overweight. And this is where you can look to kind of see if there's anything to cut. But because we went for a minimum displacement ship, we have another option. We can just increase our displacement, and then the ship will work. And this is the advantage of going, I'm just going to start on minimum displacement. And we could even go, well, you know, we're underweight. We're at 265 million. How much would it cost to push those engines to 32 knots and still get the ship on the go? So it's 286 for a 32 knot version. And if we reduce the displacement down, and 265-ish for a 30 knot version. So is a 32 knot ship worth an extra $20 million? And that's something you'll have to decide for yourself. But for me, if I'm already spending $200+ million to, like, I'm 265 to 28, but 32 knots over 30, is it worth it? That really depends on personal preference. I am going to go for the 32 knot version because I think that is going to be a very nasty ship indeed. And I tend to prefer expensive ships. But there we go. A modern battleship. She is expensive, but she's not crazy expensive. She's under 300 million, which is not too bad. She has plenty of main gun firepower. She has plenty of secondary firepower. She has plenty of range. She has plenty of protection. perfectly reasonable ship, perfectly good ship to go out with. And if you approach battleship design in a similar manner, where you are restrained, you don't go crazy on all of this, you can get ships like this out there. And this will cause the AI all sorts of problems, a ship like this. In fact, let's see what the AI can come up with against this. Because the AI tends to go for ridiculous nonsense a lot of the time. But, you know, if it's spending this much money, it'll probably push the speed way past what it needs to be, or it'll put on hundreds of massive guns but no armor and all sorts of weird things. This is a really solid ship. This is a solid ship that should do absolutely fine. So here she is. Let's see what the AI built. Probably a heap of rubbish. Wow. Okay. Well, I will give the AI some credit in that this turret being on a barbette makes sense because it is able to fire over the secondary guns, and same for this one. That is adding unnecessary weight, I would argue, but you know, they really wanted those secondaries. There's a lot of different types of secondaries as well. Don't do that. Have 2 or 3 types of gun on your ships. Don't have 20. This funnel is very strange. I don't think it's an issue, but I have a suspicion this has quite a bad offset. Anyway, we'll critique it in a moment. Let's close in. Really want this thing identified. So yeah, they've gone for really big guns, 17.4 inch guns. So they do have a range advantage on us, but it's not going to be huge. They've basically got 2 salvos that are very unlikely to hit. Maybe a third, and we're not going straight at them. We're kind of sitting parallel to the... Yeah, so we're firing back. So it's really not that big a range advantage. And you can see we have a much better rate of fire than they do. No hits yet. Oh, that's because I went with a cadet crew. Okay, just a second. Yeah, that's not really fair to this ship. I always forget that. Yeah, let's go with a trained... is it 45? I think the game spits out. We'll go for a 44, 45 train crew. That does increase the price a bit. I was keeping it on a cadets just to just to show you how the price is in campaign terms. It's, yeah, I was like, wait a minute. Yeah, cadet crews, not a good idea. And now the game's going to hang on. No, it's not. Okay, good, good, good. I'm going to get a different vessel. Okay, that's a little bit better. That's a little bit better. Where are you? Over here. So sailing parallel to each other. That's a much more sensible layout. Apart from these guns here, which are getting in the way. Take those off, and that's a perfectly fine layout. Is it Aragon for a big gun again? Yeah, even bigger. 18.2 inch guns. So it's a good way of showing the difference between a 15 inch and an 18 inch armed ship. On paper, that enemy ship has way more firepower than we do, with 8 18.2 inch guns. And we only have 9 15s. Well, this is where... See, if I lose here, it kind of makes the whole video pointless. But you'll see what I mean. hopefully. So they get one shot before we're able to fire back. Notice our accuracy, even at this very long range, is actually pretty good. Even with the coincidence rangefinders, 7% is, well, it's gone down now. Probably because they're maneuvering. Nope. That was a hit, but it didn't do anything. That did. Going right through their main deck. We block a shell from them. We overpen them again. Remember, this ship is a really, really good deck pen. A partial and a main deck pen. Now, anytime a ship takes a main deck, main citadel hit like that, that is very bad for it. There'll be lots of fires inside. Okay, they hit our main tower. More rapid hits. And an explosion. Lovely. And they lose their B turret. Hopefully we'll get to identify this before it sinks. You can see just how effective those 15-inch guns actually are. Really nice ability to just hammer this super battleship. Well, it's not a super battleship. I think it's an N3 G3 hull, but you'll get the point. Right, let's have a look at you. Agincourt. Similar displacement to us and a similar price, including crew. So this should be a fair fight, according to the AI. They are much slower than us. So if those 18-inch guns were spooky to us, we could just run away. But they're not spooky to us because the magazine exploded and they don't have any ammunition left. This thing is well armoured. It has a 16-inch main belt and an 8.9-inch main deck. But we were able to absolutely blast through it. Probably because this is using Turtleback. So it doesn't have that third layer of protection that All or Nothing has. They were using Chupana 1 and Dunite. I did say about Dunite and exploding. They've got the stereoscopic rangefinder, but I mean, look at the number of hits difference here. So it's not that that's helped. Like that didn't help them much. Yeah, we're absolutely wrecking this ship, which should be, according to the price, a fair match, but yeah, we are tearing it apart in short order. And if you kind of put that on paper, you know, 18-inch guns versus 9 15-inch guns, you'd expect the Princessa here just to run away, which she could do much faster, but she's not. She's just blapping away, very, very accurate and utterly deadly. That's a lot of flooding. And the Agincourt floods out. Very straightforward, and it shows you the kind of advantage you can get with a well-built ship. Because, according to the as far as the AI is concerned, the Agincourt should have been a match. It's only 30 million cheaper. It has bigger guns. And, yeah, it's slower, but that's most of the price. You know, if you try and push this thing to 32 knots, it probably costs a lot more. So, these are very evenly matched ships on paper. In fact, the Agincourt should be better on paper in a lot of ways. But we were able to take them out for only 493 damage. We only took 2 hits from the 18-inch guns, one of which overpenned the main tower, and the other one which was blocked. And we took some fire from their 7 and 6-inch guns, which didn't do very much. So it worked. Absolutely worked. And, you know, they lost their battleship for, like, what, 1 month worth of removing the dents and wiping off the scorch marks. That's the kind of difference that building your own ships can make. So, hopefully, you, if you have been playing the campaign and you kind of been finding the ship design aspect of it a little bit intimidating, this has hopefully helped you. Maybe even if you're a veteran, this has given you something to think about in your own designs, and I hope it's been useful. Anyway, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you again soon for some more Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts. Bye for now.